حي على الفلاح.
It was in the year 1095 when the Catholic Pope Urban II called for something that we now know as a crusade. It was a declaration, a call in the land of Clermont in France, calling brigands and thieves and knights towards an expedition that came to be known as a crusade. The reasons why that was called by Pope Urban II and then became a formal papal bull and edict calling the Catholic world to fight in war against the Muslims in Jerusalem is for many reasons. One of them was that there were rumors that were coming from pilgrims, Western pilgrims going to Jerusalem every year, that they were mistreated by the Muslims of that great city and on the way. Meaning they were pillaged and their caravans were attacked, and that information was going back to the Europeans and the Christians, and for that reason they had an incentive, they thought, to recapture Jerusalem from the Muslims. Number two, there was a time, and this is true historically, when the Fatimid Shia Khalif al-Hakim bi Amr Allah destroyed a part of the Holy Sepulchre. Remember, of course, that this is a place that the Christians believe to be the most sanctified, holy place on earth. This is a place where they believe falsely and incorrectly that Jesus died and was buried there before he was resurrected. We believe وَمَا قَتَلُوهُ وَمَا صَلَبُوهُ وَلَكِنْ شُبِّهَ لَهُمْ. They believed that they had some kind of an incentive to go and fight and recapture Jerusalem from the Muslims. Number three, there were stereotypes about Islam. Remember, of course, here the dichotomy, because in the Muslim world we had Christians living with us and they were welcomed and they were respected, living as citizens of the state. And so Muslims, we knew and they knew about Christianity and they knew about what they believe, and this is from the Quran and from the Sunnah. We believe all of this. But the Christians had no Muslim living in their lands. All these crazy beliefs they would attribute to us. And fourthly, and this is a big point here, politically, the Constantine Emperor Alexius Comnenus wrote a letter to the Catholic Pope asking for assistance because the Seljuk Muslims were intruding. And so he fought for his empire and he asked and appealed for assistance from the Catholic Pope to call the crusade, the Catholic Christians, not the Byzantines, because Constantinople was under the Byzantines, Greek Orthodox, and there was a difference between them. And so he called the Christians for a crusade. And so all these reasons put together then, they believed that they had a justification, legitimate justification to go and travel to Jerusalem, 1 year journey. Many would die along the way. More than 1/3 of those people died along the way in the harshness of the environment, the tiredness, fatigue in the journey, lack of food, lack of water, but they made that journey anyway. And so we have to appreciate to begin with that they did that for religious reasons. It was not like they went as the Byzantine hordes of yesterday. It was different. There was a religiosity in their experience. They were pilgrim knights of Christ. They traveled with the pilgrim staff and the pilgrim purse. They made a vow, declaration to do that and to die for God's sake, for Jesus' sake, for God's sake. They did all of these things. They wrote in their charters the reason why they're going. And they went, for religious reasons. Not all of them. Many of them, they went for land. They went there to settle once they've recaptured Jerusalem, to settle. They had financial reasons. But most of them, I think, went there for religious reasons. And this is one of the reasons why they took the Muslim world by surprise. So when they traveled and they went, these Crusaders who went as armed pilgrims, traveling to Jerusalem, they took the city of Jerusalem by surprise. The siege didn't last very long. And we bear this in mind that the Muslim world was divided, fragmented. Not only did you have the schism between the Sunni and the Shia and ongoing antagonism and conflict between them, But within the Sunni world, you had divisions between the Seljuk princes, so that when Jerusalem was being besieged by the Crusaders, the two sons of the Nizam al-Mulk, the Wazir Berkeruk and Muhammad, were fighting against one another when Jerusalem was being besieged. So people had no real true connection about the sanctity of the land of Jerusalem, except for those living there and the religious people of that vicinity. But it was quite chaotic and very lot of division in that time. So they recaptured Jerusalem in the year 1099. What happened then? The first Muslim response we have to the occupation of Jerusalem came from who? It didn't come from a scholar. His came some years later. It didn't come from the Sultan. They were quite apathetic. It didn't come from the Khalif. Very apathetic, distant, divorced from this. It came in fact from a poet. It came from a poet by the name of Abu Muzaffar al-Abiwardi rahimahullah. He wrote a poem, and that poem now is memorialized in our world until today. He says, how could the eyes sleep between the lids at a time of disaster like this that would awaken any sleeper, whilst your brothers in Sham are sleeping in the bellies of vultures? And this is war, and it's like the one who is lying in his tomb in Medina, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, raises his voice and says, O sons of Hashem. This was an appeal to the Abbasid Khilafah, help, assistance, money, something of assistance, but there was no response. No money came, no financial assistance, no large armies of the Khalif in Baghdad came along, nothing. And so it was in the year 1105 that a Muslim contingent on two occasions traveled from Damascus to Baghdad. One of them was led by the chief Qadi of Damascus called Abu Sa'id al-Harawi. Abu Sa'id al-Harawi was Shafi'i Faqih. The chief Qadi of Damascus traveled with a group of people, amongst them Abu Muzaffar al-Abiwardi rahimahullah and others, and they traveled from Damascus to Baghdad to petition the Khalif for help. They arrived on the day of Jummah on Friday, and they went in one of the reports, they entered the masjid, they broke the minbar as to just demonstrate their outrage. This is a big thing that's happening in Sham, while these people are just getting on with life, business as usual, business as usual. Now, not only was there no, he recited the poem. This poem I just read, and it's longer than that. He recited the whole poem. Not only was there no real, feeling, and people were not that moved, but the key thing that happened is that the people were threatened with punishment for arriving and disrupting the scene. Because, and this is a key point about buffers. Historically, we'll look at a few of them, but this is the first one I want to mention. How the world sees political buffers. Because as they arrived there, not only was it no help for them, the Khalif threatened to punish them. Why? Because it coincided with the arrival of the Khalif's second wife from Isfahan on the same day. Then you had in 1105 a response from a faqih. He outlined the strategy of the Crusaders. He said these are not people only intent with Jerusalem. No, Sicily, Spain, Jerusalem, they're looking for conquest. They're going to conquer much more than Jerusalem after Jerusalem. And it's true, because they captured en route to Jerusalem the coastal cities. Sidon, Acre, Tyre were all taken by the Crusaders. And so he was trying to warn the Muslims, this is what's happening. He also appealed to the Khalif, do your responsibility as a vice-regent of Allah on earth. Appeal to the Muslim masses to unify and not divide. No response, no political response. Again, still they're just fighting. The Seljuk Sultans are fighting against, except in small cases. There was some attempts, but they were quashed early. Crusaders were strong now. They had recaptured Jerusalem. It was in their hands. It was called the Latin Kingdom of Jerusalem. And the Muslims are, what are you supposed to do now if the Khalif is not going to send his huge armies of the Muslims? And so a decade goes past, 2 decades go past, 3 decades go past. The most important moment for the Muslim Ummah at that time came in the year 1144. The Sultan, the Zengi Sultan, you had these familial dynasties of the Zengids and the Ayyubids. And he was the head of the Zengid household, the Zengid family. He recaptured the state of Edessa. And that was a Crusader state, but by recapturing it for the first time, it showed the Muslims, no, these are a people who bleed like you bleed. They have loss like you have loss. They have victory like you have victory. There is no real need to fear them so much. There was 4 Crusader states, and that was one of them. It gave the Muslims some incentive that maybe this could lead to greater prospects for the Muslim Ummah. But Zengi, he wasn't to live much longer after that. In 1146, he was assassinated by one of his own people. But it was his son. It was his son Nuruddin. His son Nuruddin Zengi rahimahullah was an amazing person. Ibn al-Athir rahimahullah said, he says, I have read all the stories of the kings of the past. And he says, I have never seen a story of a man more worthy after the Khulafa al-Rashideen than Nuruddin Zengi rahimahullah. A man who realized that our war against the Crusaders is not only a physical one, that's temporal. It has to also be a spiritual one. That we're in desperate need of the help from Allah, assistance from Allah. We need Allah's assistance. And so he realized it must be 2. They said that he combined 2 struggles within himself. One against the enemy physically and one against himself. One against the nafs. One fighting the lower self. To achieve that taqwa, the piety with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that Allah listens to your supplications. So Allah is with you then. That's how he was, a man of principle, a man of honor. A man who would pray Qiyamul Layl and command others to pray Qiyamul Layl. A man who would fast often. That's how he was described, as someone who would fight in the day and he would pray in the night. There was a time, in fact, subhanAllah, where early on in his reign, he used to charge people high taxes to make payments for stipends, and he would charge high taxes. Ibn al-Athir relates this, and he says one of the people come along, poets come along, and they say, Ya Nuruddin, what are you going to say? When you stand alone before Allah, and your accountability on that day will be hard. What are you going to do? What are you going to say, Nuruddin, if you're lying in your grave and your armies will desert you? They said, Nuruddin, prepare an excuse before yourself. Have something great that you've done in your life that you could say to Allah, I did this for you, O Allah. And what he's trying to say to him, lower your taxes. Mercy, have some mercy on the people, lower your taxes. And on account of that poem, he reduced his taxes. People, they will say to him, he used to give stipends to the shuyukh, the elderly people praying in the masjid who could not fight, and he would give money to the fighters also. But people would say to him, why are you giving money to those who are praying in the masjid? Why are you giving money to people who are not fighting? They're just busying themselves with reciting Quran or in the masjid. They're old people. Why would you give money to them? He said to them, I do not see victory except with those people. He said, why would I transfer money from a people who fight on my behalf for me when they don't see me? And transfer that money to another people who only fight for me when they see me, with arrows that sometimes hit and sometimes miss, whereas the arrows of the others never miss their targets, meaning their prayers to Allah. And so he really embodied the spirit of Islam, of honesty and decency and good living, frugality over greed. If we learn this in our deen, the importance of frugality over greed, you would see how it would transform us as a people. This is what he showed and how he taught the people and how he showed the people. Nuruddin, there are 2 important dates I want you to remember. One is 1131 and the other is 1137. Now I know we're going back slightly because we've already mentioned the capture of Edessa, 1144. In 1131, Zengi, the ruler of Mosul, used to make these incursions into Baghdad. Power, family, dynasty, expanse. This is like, for you're doing it in the name of your family. But what happened is, in 1131, he gets to Baghdad, but he was defeated. When he's now going back out of Baghdad, he needs a place to stay. The father of Salah ad-Din, Najm ad-Din Ayyub, was the wazir of Tikrit in Baghdad. In the name of the Khalif, for the armies of Khalif, he was protecting Tikrit. But when Zengi, the father of Nur ad-Din, comes down from a defeat, he ends up in Tikrit and he asks for help. He petitions Najm ad-Din Ayyub, who he doesn't even know. But he thought maybe out of just good favor or a good kind of human conduct, he might just give me some kind of an escape route. What Najm ad-Din Ayyub does is he keeps him in Tikrit for 15 days. 15 days until they think we don't know where he's gone. Until then he sends him out, go back to Mosul where you came from and don't make trouble again. That's a favor. This is the father of Salah ad-Din, Najm ad-Din Ayyub, the father of Salah ad-Din, does a favor to the father of Nur ad-Din, Zengi. In 1137, it reverses. Because what happens is that the brother of Najm ad-Din Ayyub, Shirku, killed a Christian scribe in Tikrit. And so the Khalif expels both of them. Get out for what you did. These were people, they had rights, Allahu Akbar. From the hadith of Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, whoever harms a dhimmi, he harms me. And that Christian scribe was a citizen of the state with rights and protection. For what? Nothing. And so both were expelled. But now Zengi, who's back in Mosul, doesn't forget the favor. And this is 1137. On the night that they're leaving Tikrit, Salah ad-Din al-Ayyubi is born. On the night they were leaving Tikrit, Salah ad-Din was born. And they go straight to Mosul where Zengi is, repaying the favor. So in his early years, Salah ad-Din, in his early years and his adolescence, he's brought up and raised by the other household, the opposing household, the household of the Zengids. It was Zengi who was raising him up, and then when he's killed, as we just mentioned before, Nur ad-Din rahimahullah was mentoring Salah ad-Din, was teaching him chivalry, teaching him ethics, teaching him principles of war, teaching him, and the entourage, scholarly entourage around Nur ad-Din is now around Salah ad-Din. The reciters of Quran, Hadith, learning Deen. Salah ad-Din is benefiting from this company. But Nur ad-Din is not going to live forever. One of the things that Nur ad-Din did before he died in 1174 is he sent Shirku, the uncle, and Salah ad-Din to Egypt. Nur ad-Din, he had a plan of action. It was in 3 parts. Number 1, to unify Sham. Sham was divided, Syria, between Aleppo and Damascus. And they realized there's no way you could defeat the Crusaders with a divided Syria, because the Crusaders would come and just pick it off. You got to unify yourself, come together, and then we have a force. We have strength against the Crusaders. Number 2 was defeat of the Fatimid Shia in Egypt, because they would oftentimes ally themselves with the Crusaders against the Muslims. And number 3, the reconquest of Jerusalem. Now I'll tell you something amazing that he did. This is Nur ad-Din. You see, in Syria you had these internal states, Baalbek, Hama, Homs, and Damascus. And in these states, from the days of Nizam al-Mulk, who was the wazir of the Seljuk Sultan, died just before the Crusaders arrived. Now you know about Nizamiya because the madrasas today are named after him. The Nizamiya madrasas in India, in Pakistan are named after him, and also in the Arab world, named after him, Nizam al-Mulk. And what happens is that in these internal states of Hama, Homs, and Damascus and Baalbek, you had madrasas. They're learning about the virtues of Jerusalem and the virtues of Sham, the virtues of Damascus. Because it's an obvious point, but look at how he enacted it. Why on earth, they believed, why would people travel all the way to Jerusalem and fight and defend a city, maybe die in that city, settle in that city, if they don't know about the importance of that city? They don't know why Sham essentially is important. And so they began a process. Some were written before the Crusaders even arrived, like Al-Raba'i, Al-Wasiti. These were early books on Fadail al-Quds. And some were written in the 1150s by As-Sam'ani and others. Fadail al-Sham, Fadail al-Quds, about the virtues of Jerusalem. Hadith. The Prophet of Allah said, indeed, that when the fitan strikes, faith, Iman is in Sham. Oh, glad tidings for Sham. Oh, glad tidings for Sham. Oh, glad tidings for Sham. And what is that for, Ya Rasulullah? Those are the angels of Allah that wrap their wings around Sham. Hadith. Always remain a party from my ummah. Manifest upon the truth, victorious until the end of time. In one narration that you will find in these books of Fadail, where are they, Ya Rasulullah? In and around Damascus. One narration in and around Quds, one narration in Sham. And so the focus therefore was in that part of the world. And these hadith were used to stimulate the people, the yearning for Jerusalem. And we know what Allah says in the Quran. Glory be to Allah, Him who took His servant by night from the sacred precinct of Mecca to the sacred precinct of Aqsa by night, whose precincts we have blessed to show Him some of our signs. And so then they were familiarizing themselves with these hadith. They used the madrasa to teach people what was relevant in the contemporary setting. Salah ad-Din then, lives in this situation with these great people. Nur-ad-Din then dies in 1174. Salah ad-Din was in Egypt, defeats the Crusaders in Egypt, defeat the last Fatimid Khalif, died, and now Salah ad-Din is left with this measurable task of keeping up the unification of the Muslim world, but more than that, what about the people of Yemen? What about the people of Hijaz? What about the whole of Iraq, where the Khalif is based? Those early apathetic people who couldn't care that much, what about all those people? What about the Khalif himself? What about the army and the soldiers and the Muslims? What are you going to do with this? And so he began this process of working to bring in the Muslim soldiers. But it was not in his name, it's in the name of the Khalif.